Let's launch right into this. This is a big problem. We're talking about protecting your future. We're talking about protecting today. We're talking about protecting the past. It's everybody's problem. It's not just our problem. It's all y'all's problem. And just the fact that you guys are in the room means that you kind of get it. So that's a plus. But there's a lot more behind the scenes that I think we need to explore as a group together. And let me start out by introducing this illustrious panel of experts we have. Down on the end we have Garrett Haynes, who's a mastering and restoration engineer at Tree Lady Studios in Pittsburgh, and is a writer for Tape Op. Next to him is Tardan Feathered, which always sounds better with a British accent for some reason.
Tardan
Feathered. He's a mastering engineer and archivist in San Francisco for Mr. Toads. Next to him, Conrad Strauss, Director of Recording Arts at Indiana University. On my left, the illustrious George Massenburg, Grammy-winning engineer, producer, designer, educator, general bon vivant, and boy genius.
Bon vivant.
That there's French. On my right, John Spencer, principal in BMS Chase, one of the leading sound preservation and restoration companies in this country. Hi, I'm Glenn. I'm your humble moderator. So, I'd like to start out with a question. Assuming everybody here works in the digital domain, how many of you folks have at one time or another lost session data or audio files or show of hands, let's see. So the folks, the few of you who haven't raised your hands are either really new to this business or you've been extremely lucky so far, and I guess we can go into that later. But, or you're lying. Or you're lying like that, or they're just plain lying. I had an interesting situation. I'd like to ask everybody on the panel here to share just a brief story if they can, but I had an interesting situation about a year and a half ago where I was asked to do a surround mix for a pretty big single for an independent rock band. And we went looking for the data, and some of it lived with the producer, some of it lived with a second producer who did a remix, some of it lived with the lead singer, and when I got all of these hard drives together and put them together on my system, I still didn't have enough to put the drum kit back together. So I ended up having to build a surround mix based on the stereo mix and then augmenting stuff with it, which was just lame. But this is what has to happen sometimes when you can't find all the data. There's another famous story about Ron Fair, who's an illustrious producer, who was talking about having to remix the Moulin Rouge film soundtrack. And this was like 2 years after the movie had been released. They were going to do a remix, and they went looking for the master tapes, and there was nothing. Zero. They couldn't even find them. Let's continue to scare these guys a little bit. George, do you have any interesting tales you'd like to tell?
My come to Jesus moment was with SCSI hard drives and forgetting to unmount them and plugging another Dixie Chicks SCSI hard drive in and overwriting the super block.
You name names.
I did name names. I was supposed not to name names. And having to recreate the work. We saw the audio files, but didn't have any of the session files for a week's worth of work. And having to remember what I did for a week. And maybe you don't have to name names.
Well, I've corrupted files and lost files and had to rebuild them before. I think everyone's done that. But one thing that really sticks in my mind is a classical recording project I did, and it was done on DA-88, so this was back in the early 90s. We were very careful to back up after every session when we did the overdubs. Yes, we overdubbed on classical music. We made sure we made copies of the tapes. So every time the tape was backed up, we had 2 copies of everything, geographically separated. And when it came later for the record label to want to mix it in surround, because that was always the plan, to mix this in surround, neither copy of the tape could be found. So I don't know, that's probably a good mid-figure, six-figure loss for the record company. And there was no way to point blame. Everyone blamed everyone else, I guess.
I think we got this one here. This is your tables, Mike.
Yeah, being that I tend to specialize at the front end of converting things from either analog tape to digital or digital tape to digital, most of the disasters I encounter are with strictly just keeping a track of your materials. You know, it's not a lot of mixed sessions and really intricate things that, but it's disastrous, obviously, because you just can't replace all the tracks that were there. So in the analog world, or in the hard physical world, you just got to keep close track of all those tapes and things. That's numerous bands have lost, sending me all sorts of stuff, sending me another dozen reels to see if it's on there, because they just don't know where it is. So it can get expensive, so take care of it now.
On the mastering side, we were blessed, but on the tracking side of Tree Lady, we had I call it JBOD, just a bunch of drives where we had about 8 different drives holding all the Pro Tools sessions for bands. And the bands we work with, they have day jobs and they save up money and they don't have a lot of money, so they come and they do 3 songs at a clip, then come back 3 months later. And we lost, at the time, we lost all of our LaCie drives. They all had something with the chipset just went nuts. We lost about 48 different band sessions. And to these bands, it wasn't a lot of money. It might have been $1,500 per band, but that's $1 million when, you know, you work, you know, you're making $18,000 a year and you and your bandmates are splitting your album. And so it was catastrophic to them. And for the studio, we offered to re-record those bands at our loss, which isn't easy when you're a small, you all know the economics of this industry. But that was bad. For those people, it was the end of the world because, you know, that was hard for them to come back. So even if it's not a national or Grammy winning potential thing, losing data still matters to those whose data it was. So.
3 quick ones. 7-figure deal lost over a Guitar Hero. Can't find the drives. 600 grand into a recording and a member of the crew tripped on the way out of the studio and dropped the drive. And third one, Raw SCSI drive found behind the refrigerator, Grammy winning artist.
So
I want to hear the rest of that story at the bar tonight. Good grief.
But that's a happy ending.
That's so happy. You found it, and it probably spun up. But before we launch into any kind of discussion about technology or philosophies, I wanted to do a quick survey among the folks in the room and ask you folks a couple of questions. How many of you back up your stuff on any kind of regular basis? Okay. How many of you back up to hard drive? Show of hands.
Back up to hard drive?
Yes, as your final destination. So half the room-ish. How many of you back up to optical, CDR, DVDR, etc.? Do you do this as an adjunct to backing up to hard drive, or do you do this as your final destination? Okay. How many back up to digital tape of some kind? DLT, AIS, LTO? Oh, okay. Wow. Good crowd. How many back up to some other format? What do you back up to?
Secondary online, like Amazon S3.
Cloud?
I'm experimenting with that right now. It's not a regular thing, so.
Cool.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I'm a freelancer, so I don't have an off-site type of option. So.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, what's their policy if you forget to pay your bill for 30 days? Does it go?
It's linked to your one-click account on Amazon, so they have your card.
And of course, that'll never expire. How many don't back up their stuff at all right now? Come on, be honest. How many? Okay, everybody backs up to something.
Good.
Excellent. Great. I did a survey of, I'm from Seattle, so I did a survey in the Pacific Northwest. And by format, I had about 28 responses of people from Vancouver, BC, down to about Eugene, Oregon. And of the 28 responses, and there 10 backed up to optical, CD, DVD, and then there was a great deal of discussion about formats, you know, DVD minus R, DVD plus R versus CDR. About 9 people backed up to hard disk. 3 people backed up to multiple brands of DVDs at multiple burn speeds, which I thought was an interesting bit of voodoo. 2 people back up to multiple hard drives. 1 studio backs up to a RAID. 1 used data tape. 1 used flash drives. Scary. And 1 person didn't back up to anything because they couldn't afford to, quote unquote. To which I responded, you can't afford not to. But some other interesting data came out. These are some of the abandoned formats. Everybody has gone through a series of formats before they landed on the things they're using currently. 3 people had abandoned DLT, 2 had abandoned AIT, 2 abandoned DAT, data DATs. 1 person gave up on CDRs and another one gave up on DVD. How many of you folks have tried multiple formats before ending up with what you're currently using? Yeah, okay. Good to know. And then the last question I asked was, what do you charge for this? And this was sort of the interesting part. 2 of the studios charged a flat rate somewhere under $50 per session or per client. 2 studios were flat rate between $50 and $100. 3 studios charged per unit, typically per gigabyte or per storage unit, multiple DVDs, multiple tape, whatever. And 5 studios didn't charge anything. They worked it into the fees that they charge for their studio time, which I thought was an interesting part of the business model. So everybody's thinking about this, but I'm not quite sure that everybody's thinking about it to the degree that they understand the difference between some of the basic terminology and some of the basic techniques. So today, we're going to tear this apart into 3 different levels. We're going to discuss backup versus archival delivery formats, and then finally talk about migration. Would anybody like to help me define what a backup is, and maybe what the difference is between that and the other things?
Backup to me is a mirror image of your working drive on a daily basis, so as something goes down, you don't waste but a few minutes pulling that back and being right back up on top of it. Especially important if you have expensive musicians in the room or expensive talent in the room. That to me is a backup. We do it 2 ways. We have incremental and tape, so we feel like we're pretty well covered. Contrasted with an archive, I think what we said earlier is that the biggest difference is in documentation. Certainly an archive, you'd really want to error check, clean up titling, get rid of files that aren't pertinent or that are incorrect, like an incorrect session, that you wouldn't want anybody ever to pull up. But the biggest difference is in really keeping track of what you're delivering in an archive rate, what you're archiving, who's playing, when it was done, the descriptive metadata is added to this process and becomes your archive.
Are those backups automatic?
At our place they are, yeah.
Good.
So, based on that description, how many of you folks are doing backups compared to archiving your data? How many are doing backups? How many are prepping all of their stuff for archive and later delivery? Okay, so you both. Yeah, so you do go through and call all of your files. And, are you including like data files with player information and session information, or do you have a Word file? How are you taking care of your metadata?
I include text files, basic text files with appropriate information, depending on what it is. I work in a broadcast facility as well, so there's a lot of stuff that we've done out in the field. We keep documentation on how we did it. So we go back if we need to do any different mixing
is an example of what I typically see for documentation on most foreign digital projects. At least on the analog days, we had a track sheet.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true.
Well, let's talk about that for a second before we define the rest of our terms. How do you know what to keep? How do you know what to deliver to either your deep storage archival system or to your record label or wherever to the client, wherever the stuff ends up? How many of you folks are hip to this Producers and Engineers Wing document, recommendation for delivery of recorded music projects? Okay, not everybody. This is actually, George and John can probably talk about this in much greater detail, but this is something that's on the Producers and Engineers Wing website. If you go to producersandengineers.com, there are several documents there. There's guidelines for surround production, there's the delivery recommendations document, and there's also the brand spanking new digital audio workstation guidelines for music production. If the Pro Tools guidelines have been out for some time, but the workstation guidelines have just come out in the last week or two, and you can, I think there might still be some copies at the booth.
Yeah, that's not up on the website yet. There's just paper copies. It's still not completely edited, but it's ready.
Brand new. This the delivery document is also on the CD or the DVD that was in your goodie bag when you signed up. But this gives you a place to start. But John, can you talk for a sec about what you see and what you need to see and what defines an archive from your point of view?
Sure. We're kind of in a unique space in that a lot of the work that we do in our offices is sort of outsourcing the delivery process for record labels, in that we get the cardboard box full of optical media and hard drives and legal pads, etc. And so the documentation component for us is incredibly important, because I always use the analogy, if I've got 3 projects in front of me and project A used legal pads and project B used Word documents and project C gave me some PDFs, well, I've got reasonable documentation, but I have 0 documentation that I can move electronically, or that is being dealt with in a controlled vocabulary or using any kind of structured field sets. So I guess you wanted to mention the Library of Congress?
Yeah, that's a great opportunity.
We recently, you may have seen a press release come from the P&E Wing. We recently started a project with the Library of Congress, and our partners are Sony BMG, Universal, Warner's, EMI, Disney, and the P&E Wing. And the purpose of the project is essentially 3 things. To create a structured set of data definitions and field sets that are harmonious with work that's already out there from SMPTE and AES and DDEX and other organizations. The second process is to create an application that is platform agnostic, that will facilitate the collection of technical and descriptive metadata within the studio, as well as common business-related metadata that we don't know about until the project's done, like ISRC codes, proper publishing information, etc., which is important to remember that metadata over time increases and changes, and it is distinctly different, and in a lot of ways it takes a different path than the digital preservation files themselves. And the third component of the project is to publish a schema that this application will, those fields will then map to that schema, so that anyone that chooses to can build a SQL database and map whatever components that they need of those field sets to their own internal databases. So it's a pretty ambitious project. I don't really know what we've gotten into, but it's kind of, we're way overdue. I mean, you know, I made a little joke about having 0 documentation these days, and it really is the case. I mean, we've got to be concerned about, from an active digital file preservation management infrastructure, that the metadata component is not lost in the arguments about which format we use to back up, et cetera, et cetera. Without information about the digital preservation files, without controlled vocabularies, without controlled names, the preservation files can still just be a bunch of files that nobody knows what the heck they have.
Who's in charge of maintaining that data?
Well, it rolls downhill, and unfortunately, you know, in a lot of cases, usually it's the lowest paid or the cheapest guy in the room that is in charge of the documentation, meaning an intern or an assistant, or if, you know, if it's an indie project or an indie artist, you know, I mean, they're the cook with all the hats on, and they're the one that has to do everything. So, you know, I mean, it's a matter of whether or not, if the project is worth recording, the project is worth documenting. And so it is an unfortunate reality that in a lot of cases it does fall to the kind of the low man on the totem pole, but more and more of our label clients are drawing a hard line in terms of some descriptive and technical metadata being a component of the deliverable. And irrespective of the budget, whether it's a $5,000 record or a $1 million record, I think that we all need to find common ground with respect to the documentation that we do collect and deliver along with the project.
So who should be in charge of that stuff? I mean, should that be the producer's job? Should that be the record label's job? Should that be the engineer's job?
I think more and more bands, it's occurring to bands that it's their job, bands or artists, that it's really their job, that they're ultimately the ones that need to protect their assets. This is their work. So I think more and more, certainly bands like Nine Inch Nails, or well, there are a couple of rock bands, and they've all come to us for the recommendations, and they're all interested in getting their assets back from the record companies, because they don't trust the record companies, and they shouldn't, and doing their own data organization in their archives. So I'm going to say artists.
I think that ultimately it does fall back in the lap of the artist, because, as I said, I mean, if it's worth recording, it's worth documenting. We all know about the success ratio of projects in terms of whether or not, you know, 80-20 rule or however you choose to view it. But if it's worthy of recording, you have no idea how in the future you may be able to repurpose that, what delivery methodologies may come downstream with respect to how the consumer uses or utilizes your creativity. And while I'm a person that's really more about data than creativity, because I'm not a creative person, you're not going to get paid at the end of the day if you do not have a well-rounded and well-formed documentation environment for a project.
There are a couple of models that suggest that producers might be a good person to be on the hook for controlling metadata, and particularly in terms of updating it as the project goes by. We'll get to that a little bit later. The third term that I was hoping we could identify and define a little bit today is migration, or the transfer of data from various forms. And I was hoping we could get Garrett and Tarjan to talk a little bit about how you get stuff and what you do with it when you get it, and how do you make sure, I mean, what happens when you get a Pro Tools session, for example, and all the files are labeled audio 1, audio 2, audio 3. Either one of you care to?
And you know what, but just to set this up, there are two kinds of migration. There's technology migration and there's data migration. Technology is where you have to move from one format to a more advanced format in the future, and data is data.
Hit it.
I'm trying. Oh, I just turned it off.
No, on.
On, okay. The other, no, come on. Hello. There we go.
Well, mercifully, I haven't ever had anybody send me a Pro Tools session to migrate to anything yet. I'm a tape guy. You know, that said, there are plenty of traumas involved with getting the right material to me to archive. You know, people do it all the time, mislabeled reels, and this isn't the day where everybody was scribbling everything down, long before they were making no notes whatsoever. And we still get wrong reels in the wrong box. We get, it's just unfathomable sometimes how many reels we've got to roll to find the right reel that they're looking for. So, you know, it's really old school on my end. Just keep track of your stuff.
Label it.
We actually did 3 remixes for Rock Band this year, as well as, you know, other mixes where people, you know, traditionally go from one studio and come over and they track there and mix with us. We've been blessed on a couple of occasions. I'll talk about the good kids instead of the bad kids first, where the tracking engineers had a methodology with respect to how they organized the sessions. For instance, when they were tracking guitars, before a track was tracked, that track got a name, guitar 1, guitar 2, etc. Or because it was Pro Tools, they had notes in the notes file. And while that's blessed good, remember, not everyone might be using Pro Tools to mix, and they may lose that metadata that would be in the notes field. But the idea was they went back to something we used to do in the mainframe coding days, which was before guitars, they started like all guitars were 100 levels. So the first guitar track was 100 underscore guitar and then whatever. And then all bass was 200, and then all acoustics were 300, etc. Whatever you do, whether people do this, and they do this in finance, but it came from mainframes back when they didn't have relational databases and they had to keep things in order by using a number system. But the idea was when you go over to that bin, which can be like 666 layers of the abyss in Pro Tools on the right where your regions are, all the guitars were listed as 100s. And then when we needed to go to drums, we went down to 800s and vocals, etc. And we were in such a good position to be able to recreate the stems they needed for Rock Band, because, like, as you know, they have to have a bass stem and they have to have a drum stem or whatever, so that the kids can do their playing. They also may or may not have done color coordinating, but the idea was also all the things were consolidated. The regions started at 0 and went on. Some of the people printed plugins. We were blessed to be able to call manufacturers to give us demos when we didn't have a plugin, but you have to remember, not only do people not always have the plugins, but if you're caught between revisions of Pro Tools, like at the time we didn't have our Massenburg EQ, and we didn't have Altiverb because we were at a 7 at a point when 6 was when things were working, etc. So this goes back to, I guess, the point of the good kids was they had a methodology that had everything organized. They had printed reverbs and other effects that were strange. They had documented things, and we had a very quick time of getting up to speed to do our job. Those things are talked about readily in the P&E documents, even if you get the old one that talks about things, but the new one is more specific to DAWs and good practices you can get into. The bad people is just everything about that. I mean, just 1 second, things were cut up, things weren't labeled, they didn't start on time, we couldn't sync up background vocals with other things, and you just spend hours trying to figure out, like, your Columbus, like, where am I, without a GPS or anything. So
Marco.
Polo. So, but you had a question I saw real quick?
Yeah, is there a standard numerical system for the different multi-tracks?
Does anybody know about that? The people I work with, they picked, like, guitar, I don't know, drums was 100, bass was 200, guitars were 3 and 4, etc. The thing about it was, what was nice was they picked a standard and they stuck to it. So I knew with that group, all the guitars would be here. So if I was missing something, I could go over to the regions and at least not. I mean, the worst is when you just get everything's audio 1, audio 1, audio 1, and then it just goes on to infinity. And then you end up dragging your regions folder over so it's covering your entire screen just to try to find things and go into the timestamps.
We're going to conclude that there isn't a standard.
Well, okay.
Sorry. That there isn't a standard, and I mentioned one thing, that it doesn't work with scribble strips in the Pro Tools environment. John mentions that it doesn't work very well in the film environment. We're lucky to have Larry Blake here who can speak to that because he does a lot of naming in film.
So we'll get back to the migration discussion in a sec, but and if you guys have any questions along the way, just go ahead and fire them out at us. We're going to cover a lot of material. Conrad had some interesting concepts about naming conventions and keeping track, and he was kind enough to present me with his PowerPoint presentation based on the curriculum that you have going on at Indiana University. Do you want to talk us through this a little bit to hopefully make it a little bit easier to understand?
Yeah, sure. So at Indiana University, there are a couple of interesting initiatives going on. One that I know John and George are involved in is the Sound Directions Project, which is research into best practices for audio preservation primarily, dealing, well, and it's a partnership with the Harvard Archive of World Music. And the whole idea is to deal not just with many of these digital issues, but many of the format issues, because many of these world music archives are holding all sorts of different formats, some we've never heard of. And at the music school, we've been recording live concerts since the 40s, so we have a very large archive. Can you go to the first slide? And we'll, because basically, I wanted to, you know, these NARIS recommendations are really good, and I've kind of used them as a starting point for teaching the students about this, because we have young engineers who are learning, and they really need to understand the importance of getting your front end together on this. Being able to save data is fine, but if you can't tell what the data is, that's not going to do you a whole lot of good. So I have some slides here that I show in class, and I just copied them over, and these are basically from the NARIS guidelines. And you can see that ultimately we're really looking for the equivalent of the 2-inch tape. I know that there's some people here who are old enough to remember 2-inch tape, where, you know, you didn't keep all of those vocal outtakes, you didn't keep the guitar outtakes, you only kept, well, you could only keep what you wanted. And so the one thing in the preferred deliverables is this flattened session, where once you have everything cut together, you basically consolidate the session and you do a save as and consolidate, put that into a new session folder which contains only these final tracks. It also points out that some of the processing that's integral to the music needs to be bounced to disk. So maybe there's volume automation, plugins, tuning, and things like that, which are important to the session. These need to be done as well. And and that's of course by agreement with the producer. Maybe they're proprietary techniques which they don't want to pass on, but nevertheless it needs to be there. And it also recommends broadcast wave. Now broadcast wave now isn't a big deal. That is an option in Pro Tools and most workstations. But prior to, when did Pro Tools go to broadcast wave, 2-3 years ago? Prior to that, there was no timestamp to any of these files. So you took these files into another workstation, you know, they wouldn't necessarily line up because there was no time code on that. Let's go to the next slide. It also specifies different sessions. I mean, when you're working, there should only be a master session. The master session should be primary what you're working from. It also mentions slave sessions. Occasionally you're going to do submixes where you're sending out for overdubs, you're doing vocal comps, different things like that. You're creating slaves. And then of course there are source sessions, which is going to be during your initial tracking. Perhaps you're recording 5-6 takes of a tune and then you're editing that down. You probably want to save your source session in its raw form. But ultimately, next slide, you're going to end up with a master session. You want to keep only a single master session. I mean, how many people here have come back to a session 3-6 weeks, 6 months later and had a little trouble remembering which was the last version you were working on? That happens to pretty much everyone. So NARIS recommends that you have only a single master session, and you're very religious about determining that. They also recommend keeping a folder structure. So in your Pro Tools session folder, you keep these subfolders, the history, the source sessions, etc., where you can put unused items which you may need to refer back to at some point, but nevertheless the master session is going to be in the top level directory of your session folder, so you can easily recognize that's what you're working on. Okay, and one thing we add also is versioning, because occasionally you do want to version your master session. We recommend to students to create a versions folder and just have some kind of clear naming. And we also recommend a single song per session. So if you're doing live recording where you might have 5 or 6 songs in a single session, we recommend breaking that up so it's 1 song per session. That's something we're just doing internally, and I think ultimately you have to make these, next slide, make these decisions. And this is basically what NARIS recommends at the end. Once you're done, once you're delivering it to the mixer or maybe even the record company, flatten all of your audio tracks, remove unused audio tracks and folders, and then save as to a new folder. Now, this is, we do have the new DAW recommendations here, but this goes from the Pro Tools recommendations. So basically, you've created your virtual 2-inch tape right here. And that really becomes the master, we tell the students. I mean, the big question is, do you want to deliver all those horrible vocal outtakes to the record company where, you know, if someone doesn't like you, they can make a nice little joke reel? That is a question which I can't answer, but we tell our students this is really where you are.
Well, I was going to add that I think that it's important to remember that everything that you spoke of is an excellent approach. But by the same token, if someone needs to kick out a remix real quickly, you know, you want to have all the original source material. So if the engineer needs to start, you know, because they're doing a radio remix for something, you know, we certainly don't want to discard all of the original source material and creating the archival kind of backup so that said engineer and producer can pick up right where they left off, and we haven't really messed with any of their settings, session file information, etc.
Yeah, I think obviously, like everything, the original assets should never be discarded. But you know, I mean, as I tell the students, you know, you're backing up to a hard drive, you're doing whatever, but you know, this final version here, you could burn to 9 different DVDs and mail them to your relatives around the world, and they probably would survive whatever natural disaster comes by. But of course, the classical recordings where everything is recorded, you know, the source takes are never thrown away. I mean, that's just not done. But I mean, this is just a matter of controlling the data that you're creating. Next slide. We're also dealing a lot with file naming, and very quickly, we do a lot of recording, 500 to 600 concerts a year, plus sessions and other things, so we're creating a tremendous amount of data. And we have to create a lot of audio files, so we thought a lot about our audio file naming, and this is what we came up with, and this is really in consort with Sound Directions. We made sure we were compatible with what they're doing, and it incorporates some other standards. So next slide. We put an identifier, department identifier up at the front, and this is a good chance for anyone to identify where it comes from. So this could actually, in the case of small studios, this could be abbreviation to show what studio the file originated from. Then we add a date and time stamp, and we use the ISO 8601 format here because unlike the American, where you put the day, month, year on it, if you put the year, month, and day, then everything's going to be ordered for you. We also add a time in military time here, so any event can easily be identified by date and time, and this is when the file was created. Then we add a venue. We have 4 different venues, so this is a unique identifier for every single file. We can look at a file listing, and we can easily see of when and where an event took place. And finally, we add a unique identifier, and this is kind of an internal thing, which I won't explain right now, but it's yet another way. This is a searchable file name, if you think about it. When you have a lot of files, you've got to be able to find them. We can search it under multiple items here, if we want to. And then I got a picture of the file listing, and you can see it lays out very neatly, chronologically. And then using the search feature, I can search by a day, I can search by a venue, or I can search by the unique identifier and easily find something. And then next slide, we will extend this into sessions where we're using the NARIS recommendations of specifying your session as a source or a master or a slave, and in this case this would have been an original recording. So it has the timestamp in there, followed by the song file name and source, etc. Okay, and then next file. Track names, just want to mention that really quickly. These are the NARIS recommendations. Name your tracks, right? That's the big joke. This is what we use. Now, we just kind of made this up, and we're probably not going to stick with this, but we just wanted to come up with something that made sense for us. And we incorporate the ISO 8601 timestamp up in the front, or in the file, so we can easily identify. It's typical you might be recording similarly named tracks on different days, and this identifies them. And then we give, obviously, a serial number and what the track is. And I think I've taken up enough time. If we want to talk about metadata a little later, we can show those slides.
Cool, thank you. Which is really interesting because my sessions always end up getting named Final Mix 2, Final Mix 3, the final mix. No, really this time, super absolute final mix, version 2, 3, and 4.
We all do that.
Yeah.
Well, you touched on something really interesting here, talking about controlling your IP and being able to determine what rights you have and what you want to distribute. And if you flatten all the files and send them off to record label XYZ, that's one thing. But what happens, I mean, have you folks ever been asked for stems, for example, for a music mix? Anybody else been asked for stems? What do? Do you give it to them?
Not if we can help it.
Why?
Well, because they can just remix it without me.
George, do you want to address this?
Well, were you at the meeting, at Allison's meeting a couple weeks ago, John? The new policy of BMG Nashville is to ask all producers to provide stems. Now, this is policy that's currently being implemented because right now producers are refusing to do stems. So they're in the position of maybe having to make that part of the contract the next time and seeing if they can get producers to sign on. And that's exactly why they want to do it.
And they're going to try. I mean,
and they're going to try to do it.
Very adamant about that.
So the question becomes whether we will, as an industry, be able to resist that and take a stand. I mean, I will because I won't work for BMG. They're thugs and idiots. But other people might have to. No, I'm proud.
Backspace. How do we erase that? Okay.
We still have a First Amendment, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, part of the issue becomes how do you control your intellectual property? I mean, if you give away all of your files, people can recombine them, and not only do you not have control, you don't get credit for it, and ultimately you don't get paid for it. Maureen?
But aren't there other reasons in Nashville you're talking about that because it's taking you more time to do it, that you're not getting paid to do it as well? And what about the issue of not about different backups, like the producers and the engineers backup that has your intellectual property that doesn't get handed to the label? Aren't people starting to do that as well?
No. If by what you mean the plug-in question is not being delivered to the labels at the agreement between A&R admin and producers. I mean that's a huge issue and one that's never been resolved. And I don't think we found it resolvable. Especially going forward, it may be pointless to try to resolve plugins when going forward, leaping forward 10 years and 15 years, plugins are not going to be compatible with something in the archive. That you really want, you prefer to have the flattened file only. But we're off track here. Just addressing the STEM issue, I'm not sure that it's really credible for the record company to make a stand that they're as good at making a mix from stems as we might be under the artist's supervision, under producer supervision. I don't think that's credible, and I think we should resist it.
Well, I'm not being a producer and engineer, I certainly believe in the intellectual property of engineers, and I think that the STEM issue is one that will continue to be a thorn and something that will be worked out. But you know, there's also proposed legislation currently in the Senate and House of Representatives with respect to performers getting paid as well. And much like is currently the way it happens in the European Union. And this again is another issue, not relating necessarily to intellectual property, but relating to getting paid. And to me, the STEM issue and the performer information are still there. There are a couple of, shall we say, ill-defined revenue streams that we have to address going forward.
And this ties in neatly with the metadata project that you're working on. Obviously, in the EU, metadata relates to who performed on the project, who produced, who engineered, when was it done, who gets paid ultimately. that's where this whole thing ties together.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
How are you differentiating between a flattened file and a stem?
A flattened file is essentially a file that's a single file that's re-recorded with plugins.
Right.
So you just render that file with plugins in place, whereas a stem may be a series of guitar tracks that are mixed in stereo, or maybe a drum submix, or maybe a vocal submix.
Actually, not exactly. There are actually three things we're talking about. You're talking about a flattened file which has all edits resolved. You now have a contiguous, call it the left justified file. You have a bounce. The bounced file is a file that is flattened and also has level rights, automation, all plugins, and just appears as a generic WAV file.
Connie, were you going to throw in?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's much more, yeah.
Gotcha. Which one phrase that was mentioned before, virtual multitrack, it's not. Virtual multitracks don't have defined link view, they don't have the automation. So
Well, occasionally they would cut with reverb or bounce with reverb, so it's not, yeah.
But you couldn't put the multitrack on and just
Right.
play it in there with your band.
Right. Well, it's really a term I use because I like to use the example of and these guys have heard this twice already, so forgive me. The Beatles anthologies, that was an enormous revenue stream for EMI, and it worked because EMI could go into the archives, pull out the original tapes, put them into Pro Tools or whatever they used, Sonic, I think maybe they used at that time, and cut together different versions, right? And that's because those tapes existed, and they could find them and they could play them back, and that's really what we're looking for, is that kind of ability to save our assets and repurpose them later.
Well, that's fine when
Save
you talk
our
about file
assets.
files and nothing more.
Save our assets.
That's my intellectual
Yeah.
property. You're talking about
Yeah.
file files and nothing more, but that's not what the record companies want. They need to do karaoke, they need to do rock band, they need to do whatever they want.
Well,
But-
and I guess I would turn it back to you and say, obviously you have very strong feelings about this in terms of how it impacts you financially and economically, and this is just one of those things that, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer for it, and you have to be in a proactive dialogue with whomever you're working with and be willing to either accept or walk away from that particular project with respect to the intellectual property that you are or are not giving away.
Oh, yeah.
Would
It's
you
gonna be a
agree?
compromise.
Yeah.
There's several levels of compromise, but
Multiple levels of compromise.
It's worth mentioning working for Hollywood film companies. Generally, you sign over everything. You give them stems. That's what they expect. That's what you expect. And sorry, they get everything. And they own. Believe me, they own everything, including publishing. When you sell a song to film companies. So we know it can be done. We know it's something that we do. But there's that issue of artist intent. That if we really, if we're still charmed by the idea of doing great recording work, there's that issue of artist intent, that the artist really should be able to review his or her work before it goes out. And with the record company doing a final mix, getting quite possibly a good mix, but as likely to be a bad mix or a ham-handed mix, again referring to BMG, loathsome company if there ever was one, it's not going to be artist intent at all.
Question, Larry.
Issue of stems is sort of acquired a bad reputation for reasons I sort of understand, but I think it should be made clear that forget the issue of labels of remixing what you do. I think in terms of the setup you have, whether it involves outdoor gear, whether it involves mixing a box or a hybrid, the idea that you sit down and you're mixing this thing that's taking weeks, months, and years of your life, and there's no downside to mixing the stems. I mean, there really isn't, because you can make the stems feed your monitor such that the two-track mix you do is exactly those stems, and they are one. I mean, that's the way I do films. They are the same thing. There's no difference between the print master and the stems. There's literally no difference. It's just one is a sum of the other. And so, again, aside from the issue of intellectual property and labels screwing with your work down the line, I think everybody should do stems, because this way, 10 years later, if you have an LCR drums and LCR, with everything baked in that you did, and you want to change something, the chance of your being able to, for you to go back and change it, there's going to be a snap, you know? And there's no
We're talking about
downside.
two different things.
What's that?
Well, we're talking about delivering stems and holding stems for you to use in your work.
Yeah, yeah.
Delivering stems to a record company is
Right, but I think people have a thought of stems.
right, stems aren't bad in and of
Yeah.
themselves, they're not
Yeah,
bad.
yeah.
Yeah, there are a number of producers that we know that will deliver the virtual multi-track that Conrad was referring to, and then keep in their private archive, will keep the stems
Yeah.
for revisions.
Can I just make one other quick point? You know, the way I see it, and the reason I use that terminology for virtual multi-track, and people have taken me on for that before, is for you know, the students I have, these young kids, you know, they've grown up with computers, they're fairly cavalier about data and using it, and it's really changing the way of thinking. It's, you know, I mean, what can we say, 95% of what's recorded, you know, probably doesn't need to be saved, but how do we identify the 5% that does need to be saved? And we do need to save it. So the approach is to change the thinking and say, you're doing this for the long term. What do you have to do to ensure that this data stays alive for the long term? Because we can see you can make millions of dollars off of some of this stuff later on.
Question?
Hi, I'm really learning a lot from this, but the reason I came to this is, are there any recommendations for what formats are going to survive?
You're reading my mind. That's where we're going next.
It's like Friends Hotline.
Ah, yeah.
Call me now.
Yeah, and don't order the shrimp tonight. It's like your friend's house. Sorry. Let's do exactly that. Let's go down the line here and figure out what we're using here that works. And I'd like to start with Tartan, because I'm not really familiar with your studio setup and your technology. Can you talk a little bit about what you're using?
At the, you know, the recording level, you know, waves broadcast waves. You know, that's what I deliver, you know, because they're going to play. You know, certainly over the last 5 years, there was a debate about whether DSD, you know, was the archive format of the future, or even today. But myself, I don't think that's still an argument. I think DSD is failed with Sony's abandonment of it. So I think we're stuck with PCM WAV files for the foreseeable future.
So what platform do you work in?
As a Mac or PC?
Yeah.
Yeah, all Mac.
And what app?
Generally, I run Logic.
Interesting. So what do you record to? What media do you record to?
Well, it really depends on the size of the archive. You know, 90% of my clients are just the individual band trying to pull up their high school memories and want to remix. And so generally, I'm shipping them off a DVD. Would be the first choice for the single reel, or, you know, a couple of reels of stuff that'll fit on there. As soon as you have to move past 4 or 5 DVDs, then usually I'm just recommending they pick up a hard drive so that they can do it. But this isn't long-term commercial prospect stuff. So then you move past that and you move to the actual archives. And those I'm generally delivering on a small RAID 5 plus spare, so that they've got a chance to have a drive fail and not lose everything, and then have another drive fail and not lose everything. And ideally you give them a little training, look for the red lights. If there's red lights, you're in real trouble. So that tends to be the extent of it. I haven't, moved past a RAID 5 plus spare as a means of delivering yet. Nobody wants tape. LTO is great, but that's like an enterprise level solution. It's not from even my biggest archives that I've done. Still just want it right there in front of them to work on. That's their first demand, is they need to be able to access it without loading it back in off a tape. So, and then I send them off with a little caveat. By the way, every 5 years you should copy this to something else, or find some offsite data storage.
Do you talk to them about exercising the drive on a regular basis?
They're always on, I hope. I mean, in a way, they're working on them. These people aren't copying stuff over. I don't know of anybody who's coming to me who's copying things over to just put again in the closet. There's some immediate reason why they need to use this, and they need immediate access to it.
But 5 years down the road, I mean, how do they know that once they turn that RAID off, it's going to spin up again? Do you advise them? Do you give them the caveat that?
Absolutely. We pass on the caveat that they have to, this has to be in a couple of different formats. If I'm delivering it to you right now in this format, you should be arranging for some offsite data storage, if that's all you're going to do when you get it. You know, I'm talking the 2-3 terabyte range archive, you know, and it can go up to 15 or so. It's about as big as I've done. So get that offsite, you know, but you can't put it to a bunch of hard drives. You can't put it to optical disk. You know, you'd grow old doing all that stuff at that size.
We had a question.
You grow old anyway.
Do you keep a client archive of your work? Or what the work you've done for them?
I keep it as long as I can hold on to it. I can't keep an archive of everything everybody's doing through my studio. I have a nightly backup with backup PC, backups, everything up to RAID 5 plus spare. And then, you know, we cycle those drives out, and after a year or so, I can put them back in. And, you know, it's mostly to address if there's any issue with the transfer, if there's any questions that I have to answer for them while they're working on it. But I don't provide long-term archival solutions, although we've just added some more space, and we're eventually going to be adding not just like physical media storage, but he's not my partner, but he's my IT guy at the studio. He's really all over trying to provide data backup services for people. So I think we're going to go there in the future. But right now, you know, I'm really the practical, like, go-to guy. I've got this tape. I don't know what it is. Can you play it? And I'm going to just send it to me. You know, and we'll play it and give it back to you in a file you can use.
Garrett has an interesting experience with not just his own stuff, but dealing with Iron Mountain. But you've also given me some graphics talking about the method that you use. You want to talk about your backup / archival?
Sure. I don't know if all of you have heard of Iron Mountain, but they're a multinational company that specializes in deep and long-term storage for corporates and other individuals' collections. In Pittsburgh, where I am, about an hour north of us, is an Iron Mountain location. It's a climate geographically stable. I don't know if it's a mile below the earth, but CBS and many other media companies store tapes and audio assets there. A few years ago, Ken Calais and Klaus Trelby formed a company called Zeppa Digital, where they put a recording studio across the hallway or across the cave from these other assets, where they'd bring over source tapes from James Brown, whatever. They would transfer them to digital and then securely beam them back to the record company. The only reason I bring them up is because they do this day in, day out. And I interviewed them a few years ago for EQ, asking, well, what do you do for your archive strategy? And this is basically what I got from Klaus, and it's what we adopted. And it's by no means optimal, but it's better than most. But basically, I put together the following illustration, and it's a little bit simplistic, but the idea goes like this. We'll start January 1st. Let's say you have an archive data set, and we'll call that A. You buy a drive, it's brand new, you copy your stuff there, and we'll say it's 0 months in service. So then we go to the next slide, which is 6 months later. July, we add another drive. We give it a name of 201. It's new. We put data set B there. You see that 101 is 6 months old. We try to spin them up every 1 to 3 months to make sure that the lubrication in the joints, etc., is fine, that there's no voltage issues. And then we move another 6 months forward to January 2008. We add 301. So now you see we have 3 sets of archives because we're such a successful studio. We have so many projects going on, etc. Moving another slide ahead, you see that we're at 401, and approximately after 18 months to 24 months, to be conservative, we want to start to retire drives. So what happens here is, and you'll notice that I added drive 501, he is going to take the data from 101 he is going to assume the archive data set A, and if you advance the slide, you'll see the graphic of the arrow bringing the data over. And then we'll take drive 101 and we will wipe it and sell it on eBay for a few bucks for money. And then we will continue, and what we're doing in this case is after 24 months we retire drives by copying everything to it, of course verifying, you know, bit for bit. But the idea is from Klaus and from me, and you'll find out that there are good and bad points to this from other members here. The idea is we don't trust optical media, we don't trust tape for right or wrong reasons, and we just keep regenerating hard drives every 18 to 24 months so that you're constantly refreshing your data. As you see, there's no long-term deep storage of it, and the other problem is that this exponentially starts to just get bigger and bigger, and you need more and more folks to spin up drives, and instead of spinning up 4 drives, you know, a few years down the line, you're spinning up 30 or 40 drives, etc. And, you know, this could turn into like the population bomb that exponentially you end up in a room of drives of drives of drives, even if they get bigger. So that is what we do at Tree Lady, and it was all fine and well. And we had, by the way, 2 sets of everyone. So 501 had a partner. The problem was that we had 2 Glyphs, 2 Lacey's, 2 Granite Digitals, etc. And all our lessees, or however they say it, they all had a chipset issue that shot electricity through the platters. Now they're behind Surgex and they're behind sequential power surges and even on an APC, but that doesn't change the fact that if someday you have some doom called Armageddon mass drink the Kool-Aid suicide with your chipset, we lost both the drives. So that's when I was telling my horror story at the beginning. Even though I had 2 copies of everything, the problem was they were with both the same vendor, and they both died at the same time, so there wasn't a backup of the backup of the backup. And so I didn't have a tape I could go to. I didn't have a DVD I could go to. And the bands who are supposed to have archives, which we give them, I don't know where it is, man. I think I... So I don't know. So we lost a lot of stuff. So there are good points and bad points to this, but that's what we've been doing, and I wanted to share that with the group.
Thank you. Now, Conrad has kind of a special case because he has like a staff of minions whose job it is to remember their data strings so that they all meet in a big room and write them. No, I'm kidding.
Actually, it's chiseled into stone tablets.
Chiseled into stone tablets. Could you briefly describe the enterprise level system that you folks use?
We're lucky because we're in a large state university, so we have a very well developed IT infrastructure, and we can piggyback on top of the sciences. So we can use the same enterprise class storage system that they're saving the human genome on. I mean, which do you think the scientists think are more important? Well, there's a lot of money going into research for that, so we're pretty lucky. So we have 4 recording facilities plus some other computers which do some recording, and everything is backed up nightly to a server, and we use an Apple Xserve, and everything's stored on a RAID 5, and that's scripted and automated. And I have to give props to Travis Gregg over here. He's the one who's, while I sit up here and take credit, he's actually the one who did all of the work, but a couple of years he can take credit, right? But he did all of the scripting, so I just want to call him out here. So anyway, it's stored on the RAID 5, and then once the data is processed in certain ways, we have to deliver it to certain areas that I'm not going to go into right now. Then it's backed up to the massive data storage system, which is a large tape archive and automated. These are called MDSS. Most universities have something like this. It's a combination of spinning disks and an auto-loading tape archive, and it's geographically separated, so it's actually in 2 places separated by 50 miles, maybe not enough geographical separation. So it's pretty robust and pretty secure, not available to everyone. Plus we have high bandwidth connection, so we can really be sending this data. What is the connection to MDSS? It's like 2 gigabits, something like that, 4 gigabit. Yeah, it's pretty high. I mean, we do a lot of data, but it moves pretty quickly. So we're lucky in that regard. I do recommend to students something different they don't have available here. And what I tell them to do just to get them thinking, is to always be backing up, doing an incremental backup of everything they do to a second hard drive. I recommend rsync to them, which is a really good application running on Mac. And then, just to get back to the virtual 2-inch tape, I'm sorry about that, I say, you know, this flattened session, which is the master that you're mixing off of, make a couple of DVDs of that. So they're really spreading their risk around a couple of areas. And I'm not really recommending this as the ideal scheme for doing it, but the thing I like about it is it gets the students into the mindset of thinking that this is actually the process of production. This is what we need to do to ensure that this is part of completing the record besides just mixing it.
I was going to say, you brought up something when I used to work for the University of the Michigan University system. And what they did at the state level was authorize the use of fund allocation. So Western Michigan would send to Eastern Michigan. They would each hold backups for one another across the backbone. The state allocated money to hold that so that you had off-site redundant backups. And plus, because they were attached to the backbone of the internet, they had really great connections. And the other thing I wanted to add for folks is, if we are flying terms around like RAID 5, RAID 2, LTO, etc., jot them down, and then afterwards, make sure you look them up if you can't get a hold of us, because you know, you guys know a heck of a lot more complicated stuff in what you do in engineering, from parallel compression to phase, than these terms here. They're just talking about different ways you strap disk drives together and what they do. But they're very fundamental to what we do, and they impact you whether you realize it now or later, because there's two people, those that have lost data and those that will. So make sure if any of these terms that we're whipping around, ask one of us or look it up afterwards.
Let me make one more comment if I can, real quick. You know, we have a fairly sophisticated tape backup system, but I'm sure that John here, and we probably all think, most people think, I can't possibly afford a system with an LTO. That's way too expensive. And I'm hoping that John will dispel that myth, because in fact, this is a very real solution which everyone can afford.
Look under your seats. John has purchased an LTO for every audience member here.
Yeah. Thank you, Connor, for skipping ahead 5 slides in my presentation. Actually,
and by the way, RAID 5 plus spare is really cheap too for 3 terabytes. I mean, it's really easy to do these days.
How much?
$2,000.
Yes.
Do you have a specific recommendation for product?
I like the Weebie Tech.
Okay.
Weebie saver.
Cool.
And then if you're really creative, you can find out who Weebie Tech buy their stuff from, and you can go get them right out of Taiwan for a lot cheaper.
Ask him.
George has been kind enough to supply us with a graphic of how he operates his system.
Well, first, I want to say that John Spencer and I came with the mission of making it clear to everybody that you can afford tape, and to give you some idea of what the benefits of tape are. If IT is going to tape, even if it's storage tech, there are reasons why it's worth it. And one of the main reasons is that the projected lifetime is longer. That the tape solution is thought to be the 30-year solution. Now it's not the 100% 30-year solution, but it's part of the 30-year solution. We have a system at Blackbird where by the end of the day, a session is on as many as 5 different drives. I, as a producer, have a massive LTO incremental archive on a library, and I have the daily archive of a given session. These are 2 different LTO archives. We also have an online, I mean, this is in addition to the Pro Tools hard disk, which is a Studio Network solution, a 2 gigabit Studio Network solution array of 15K drives, which is backed up every day incrementally to a mirror drive on a RAID 10. A RAID 10 is both fast and redundant, by the way. So that, again, at the end of the day, we can, if we have a glitch on a session, we can pull it back in its entirety without having to wait for tape. But we also have it on tape just in case through some glitch, the rate goes down, which it hasn't yet. We also deliver if the client is active and just bringing in a 1 or 2 day session, it'll go out on his FireWire drive. In parallel to all this, Vance at Blackbird also has an incremental backup to tape, which backs up everything that we do and goes on the shelf. So if everything else goes wrong, a client can come back. And this is not a primary backup. This is just something to back up people like the guy that this is just something to back up the client, just to be a secondary backup, just in case they lose it. It's pretty likely that it's going to be on our archive. All of these are LTO3, and both John and I will speak to the expense as being, you know, this stuff is cheap. This is $50 for 400 terabytes, 400 gigabytes, and it's coming down too. Every generation,
Really is, yeah.
you know, comes down, and it's, I don't know whether we could say it's tracking hard disk prices, but it is coming down. But as John and I will point out, you can get a library loader, LTO loader for around or under $5,000, and individual single tape units. If you go out on eBay for new or refurbished, I like to buy refurbished because it's already gone through its infant mortality phase. For well under 1,800, and new for around 2 to 2,100, and maybe even less.
So you pitch tape.
And they were double that just 2 years ago.
And they were double that.
All right, well, this is, this is where it's funny, I got tarred and feathered within the Association of Recording Sound Collections conferences as having LTO stapled on my forehead because I'm a huge believer in data tape. And you'll notice if anybody does bother to review our document, number one, you should realize that we've gone through 48 revisions. and in the most recent revision, we got rid of DLT and AIT. And if you paid any attention to Quantum's annual report, buried in the footnotes, it was plain to see, in 6-point font, that DLT and SDLT R&D money is over, spent, done, and game over. So Quantum is essentially going to be exiting stage left, the DLT and SDLT format. So that got wiped from the delivery recommendations. Sony being a single vendor scenario, AIT gone from the long-term recommendations. And this is where I do, I guess, differ with some of the guys on the panel here in that I don't trust hard drives at all, period. I don't trust optical media, period. You know, for DVDs, for example, I mean, we deliver for access purposes gold CDRs and gold DVDRs, but, you know, we've just seen in less than 2 years, one of the two next high-capacity DVD formats bite the dust, whether it was politics or however you decided that happened, it still happened. In the existing DVD realm, you know, there are 13 different formats, 6 of which are not even recognized by the Patent Holders Consortium. So the shelf life of the carrier in terms of, well, this is supposed to last 50 years or 100 years, that is a moot point anymore. We have to recognize the fact that a semi-active or a supplemental migration process has to happen. Back to the hard drive thing, I mean, ultimately, you have a closet full of drives, you're going to have to hire somebody to spin them up. So we used to have proprietary equipment in the, I can't see any of you now, I have my reading glasses on, so that makes it easier. But, you know, once upon a time, you know, we had proprietary technology within the professional recording community. You know, we had dash machines, we had PD machines, we had purpose-built equipment. We don't have that anymore. And with the advent of things like Sarbanes-Oxley, more typically referred to as the Enron law, and HIPAA in terms of your health information, accountability, what these laws created was that public companies, the CEOs would go to jail if they lost the data. So it was like, shit, you know, they spent tens and hundreds and billions of dollars in terms of being able to make sure that they could pull back emails, instant messages, you name it, from 5 years. And so we simply have to look to emulate the best practices of what those companies do. And what George has laid out essentially up here is the common framework, which is disk to tape. The idea that even we can look at a 20, 30-year cycle, to me, is, I think, also something that you cannot believe in. And we also don't know what technologies are going to become available within the next 5 to 10 years. So we have to keep our fingers on the pulse with respect to what technologies will be available, and so that we can make appropriate left turns and right turns in our decision process as we make those supplemental migrations of data. I do think that in the cloud, you know, maybe, again, you know, you got over 100 plus companies now doing in the cloud storage. I mean, that may be an alternative. Certainly multiple copies and geographical separation are the, you know, baseline criteria for the storage of data. And I would go back to the respect to a RAID array, and, you know, I can park 2 terabytes of data on LTO tapes for less than $200. And it takes up, you know, essentially the space of 3 water glasses. And so I think that tape really has gotten kind of a bad rap, because a lot of people, it's like, well, I checked into one of those LTO tapes, and I remember, yeah, the first IBM LTO OneDrive I bought was $4,000. That's simply not the case now. They are incredibly cheap, and for me, it's difficult, I guess, being an IT person, to understand how someone would have no problem dropping $2,500 on a mic pre, but just can't seem to find, you know, the rationale behind spending $1,500 on an LTO tape drive. You've got to figure out a way to put that, position that, whether you're the artist, the creative person, the studio owner, et cetera, and make that a part of your best practices workflow. So I'm going to kind of get off my soapbox here.
If I can just pop in and add a couple of things and then ask you a question. One, I just don't know if we've made it clear yet that LTO is an open standard of tape backup, as opposed to like DLT, which was Quantum's brand, and AIT, which was Sony's brand. At this point, you've got multiple vendors supporting that, so you can hopefully count on somebody keeping making that gear for a long time.
Well, yeah, it was I actually worked with the Technical Partners Consortium before LTO ever came to market, and the beauty of it is that they laid a roadmap out through LTO 6, and they have a third-party testing firm so that any vendor can make either media or tape drives, bring it to the third-party testing laboratory, and if it conforms to the spec, then they can sell that product with the LTO logo on it. Another important thing to remember is that it's a fixed head drive. Another important thing to remember is that there early on people were thinking, oh, there's azimuth issues in terms of interchange between tapes. Well, there's a servo guide freaking track written down the center of the tape, which automatically adjusts the head. So you have drive compatibility essentially off the table. So, you know, we're currently at LTO 4, which is 800 gigabytes native on a tape that's about $900. $90, and LTO 3s are I paid $38 a pop for, and that's 400 gigs.
And then I actually have one question of you, which is LTO just isn't as simply as hooking up a drive, as simple as just hooking up a drive to your computer.
No, it's not. So, I mean, but it requires a SCSI card, you know, for one, you know, like a 320, but again, from a cost perspective, the ROI occurs relatively quickly in terms of, you know, the writing of tapes. I mean, I have a lot of times small archives that will come to me that will have a stack of FireWire drives, and we'll charge them like $50 or something, and we'll just write LTO tapes for them. And so now they've achieved two things. They still have access vis-a-vis their hard spinning disk, but they also have the data with checksums stored on a data tape that they can go geographically separate.
It's important to note that this is not the 1,000-year solution either, that you still need to keep an eye toward migration in the future, and that every 2 to 5 years you need to re-encode this stuff. You need to migrate it to whatever the next format is. Question?
That was along the lines of my question. You mentioned tape life, but drive life, not only mechanical drive life, but is it going to be obsolete in a year, 2 years?
They addressed that. Yeah, it is a good point, and I meant to bring that up. The LTO consortium, I think, addressed that in a very proactive fashion. The way it works is it has a read capacity of N-2. So, for example, if you have an LTO4, you can read LTO4, LTO3, or LTO2. It has a read-write of N-1. So if you have an LTO4 drive, you can read and write LTO4s, read and write LTO3s. Also, at the beginning of the LTO3 cycle, you began to have the capacity of worm, which is write once, read many, meaning that you cannot alter the data on the tape.
We should also mention that LTO4 can in fact read LTO1. Yeah, and I mean, it might well work. But the other thing that we haven't touched on yet is the logical organization of the drive, or the backup program we use. We've been talking about retrospect. We love it and hate it. As a committee, we could not get DANCE, now EMC, to respond with the same guarantee that we got Thales Group to respond with, which was that to NARIS they would provide a document guaranteeing that they would hold their code in escrow, so that if there's a glitch in the company and you have a brew formatted archive, that you could go to a Thales Group or to whoever the receivers of Thales Group are and pull the code out of the archive if the programmers have gone away, and bring the code up and read your archive. We have received no such encouragement from EMC, DANCE, Retrospect, and in fact, they're kind of a little hostile.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You
I
know,
remember when they didn't support FireWire drives, and I wrote them about that, asked them, what their calendar read. If it was Roman or it needed a sun to.
Well, I mean, at this point in time,
That's a good way to
just going to
respond.
say, at this point in time, to EMC, Mac Retrospect is like the fly on the tail of the cow, and
Much like audio is to IT.
True, but in retrospect, you've got, okay, you write it on a piece. I mean, I've had a record label tell me that I wrote a corrupt. They requested a retrospect tape. I write it, and then they tell me it's corrupt and no good, and it's because I wrote it on a Mac, and they're trying to pull it back on a PC.
It's a different archive format.
Yeah, and so there's complete incompatibility there. George and I could probably spend 3 hours talking about versioning and compatibility issues with respect to either the operating system or the rev of the application, which is another cool thing about Brew or Tar, in that you're getting out of the way in terms of having to worry about staying on top of versioning issues.
Just a quick one, follow-up. So I don't doubt the reliability of the extra backup in the tape, but from your talk, even though LTO is an open standard, the method of writing to it is not open. And am I right about that, the software choices?
Well, there's one that is open, but you've got to be really careful. The one that is open is TAR. TAR has evolved through the years from a program that can handle a 4 gigabyte archive to one that can handle one much larger. But since it's fairly arcane, and you have to be a programmer to use it or to script it, and the fact that a lot of people didn't realize that TAR archives were limited to 4 gigs, some archives were lost. The other thing about TAR archives is in the Mac environment, you may not get what you're looking for. If you want something with resource fork, you have to move your resource. I don't want to get into it.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit complicated to use TAR, the only truly open source format. Brew we like a lot because they at least have a public reader, a no fee a free reader on a lot of different platforms, including Sun, including HP Linux, including HP.
It is incremental as opposed to
And
far as a
but the problem with Brew is it doesn't do a real GUI incremental solution like Retrospect. You know, we haven't gotten them to do that yet, but we're trying. But what this means is there's really no optimum solution.
Right. I have a question for this panel. The things we're talking about for an optimal backup strategy, you have things like redundancy, you have offsite, you have an IT investment, you have a maintenance, etc. And our audience is a recording studio that's lucky if they can pay their electric bill this month, okay? Not only is it possibly an economic strain, but it is outside of the realm of their core competencies, what they do, okay? How far are we from having connections, fiber connections, where I can hire an offsite place in St. Louis who has a backup in Washington State and get into a service level agreement with them, and every night I hit a button and pump my stuff to them, they mirror it, they do a one-to-one, and all of the obligations we talk about, however well-intended and however right, are relieved from me as a studio owner who's lucky I can understand phantom power.
Well, I think, I mean, for example, Iron Mountain offers that as to their public companies as nightly backups, grabbing all the emails and the financial information and stuff.
Right.
But you know, okay, you can't afford your light bill. Well,
Yeah.
can you afford a frickin' T1 bill?
Well, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping now with these, well, some people may know, we may have fast downs at home, but your ups are slow, okay? And so you have to go and get a dedicated business or a special T1, 2, 3, whatever. But what I'm saying is, I think it might be better for the studios to invest in whatever it takes to get that up. And what they would pay Iron Mountain plus that up, they would get a better backup, a more reliable backup, I'm hoping, with less time spent that they could be doing to generate other income. That's what I'm hoping.
Well, I'm hopeful for that too. But meanwhile, we're putting more FireWire drives on shelves.
Yeah.
And even what you're talking about now to implement would be an $8,000 to $12,000 annual cost if you drop the T1. And so, you know, I mean, Verizon's doing fiber to the house.
Right.
You know, I mean, when we have fiber to 75% of the locations in the country, hell yeah, it's going to be viable. But I think that for us to say, okay, until we have a cloud solution or an off-site solution, that we do nothing, is a wrong message as well. I mean, yeah, everybody has trouble keeping the lights on. I have trouble keeping the lights on.
I'm being figurative in my
I know,
example,
it's a cost.
but it's an issue.
It is an issue.
But we even have a really nice air quotes business connection, and when I go to post references for clients, even though it's a few minutes, that's at 700 megs over a few minutes, what would a terabyte take? You know, and some of our Pro Tools sessions are gigs and gigs and gigs.
Well, this is the old T1 solution, and it's obsolete.
Right.
T1 is 1.5.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
obsolete. We've got 8 T1s.
It's 1.5 in optimal condition.
In optimal condition, when it's not being throttled down.
It's not. Yeah, I find you get about 75 kilobytes a second up on a 1.5 up.
Sure.
It's bad.
So in Washington State, the University of Washington is doing some experiments with other college IT departments, and they're calling it Internet 2. And they have I'm not exactly sure of the throughput, but it's like having FireWire basic speed.
Well, it's 2 gigabit.
2 gigabit. 10.
With the old
Do I hear 12?
We were able to actually transfer 30 megasecond from Indiana University to St. Louis to all sorts of places.
But isn't that for
Right, at
for
which
streaming
point
adult
that becomes
video?
ubiquitous, like broadband is now, and they said would never happen. At least on the business level, I mean, it's not really practical for a cloud
For
solution.
streaming, question.
I'm actually next internet to your point. So, the current network is a 10 gigabit backbone. The 40 gigabit backbone is nearly complete. So, and there's already plans for the 100.
I just wonder what they're going to charge for that when it finally hits.
Well, current membership rates and connectivity fees are $250,000 a year.
We can afford that.
Yeah, write a check. Look out of your seats, folks. There's also.
At that point, dark fiber might be cheaper, but interesting. Well, the idea of this panel today is we wanted to not only bring up some of the issues, but we wanted to offer some solutions. Now, a year ago, if we were to have this conversation, we wouldn't have been able to say with as much confidence that you need to start migrating off of hard drive ultimately and onto tape. But it's starting to look like within the last few months that LTO is becoming certainly a much more cost-effective option and perhaps the only viable long-term option. So at this point, I think it's safe to say that until the next technology comes down the pike, those of us who can afford to consider long-term storage of our data, LTO becomes a much more attractive option. I have one last story that I kind of wanted to leave you with, which comes from a friend of mine in Florida who runs his own studio, produces at a mid to high level, and he asks his clients if they want to back up their information daily. And so the clients that do pay a $50 fee, he backs it up on DAT72. Those who choose not to back up their sessions, he backs them up anyway, doesn't charge them for it. But every time something goes wrong and they need that data restored, it's $250. So 4 of those a year pays for all of his media costs throughout the year, and it becomes not only a profit base for him, but now he's got a client that's tethered to him because he owns their data and they don't. And that's a choice the client makes. But this is, as long as you're thinking about solutions, you have to think about how to pay for them. And if you're having a hard time keeping the lights on, maybe this is an alternative way to think about it. It's another way to factor that in to make it work. Oh, okay. Yeah, John points out something. You can get questions to us in terms of if you have any specific questions about these guidelines and recommendations documents or anything that you may come up with by emailing pnedeliveryrecs@grammy.com, and that is on the bottom of the first page of this delivery recommendations document, which is also on your CDR. Are there any more questions? Yes, you have a question?
Not really questions, just one thing I just want to point out.
Yeah.
It seems like everybody, including us at Indiana University, talked about their backup solution, and something that really just breezed over was that it's automated. So everybody's here is automated. So all these small studio owners or large studio owners, you might want to talk to your techie dork friend and really figure out automated solutions so you're not sitting there late at night copying hard drives back and forth.
It really does have to happen every single night,
Yeah.
automatically. Starts at 2 or 3 a.m., kicks off at 7, 8 a.m., just so you're not going to be doing any work, in general. You got to stop it if you're still working and the backup starts. So maybe it's 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. We're not that early a riser. I can't remember what our time is. But
Well, here's a wacky question. I know Pro Tools is just now available for Leopard, but how many folks are using or have thought about using Time Machine? Any success there? Just started?
Not as a primary gear backup, but as a working extra backup, yeah.
Is it slowing the computer when it's doing it?
I'm not using it on my production machine, I'm using it on my office machine, so.
Right. Anybody using it on production machines?
I plan to.
You plan to? I plan to too, but not until it's like version 1.7.
You can report back next year.
Yeah.
yeah, let us know how it goes.
We'll talk about it. There was a question back here, somebody?
The CD, or the producers and engineers.com, that's where that paper
Yes.
is located.
Yes, that's correct. Any other questions? Yes.
I haven't had any experience with data tape, and this might sound really naive, but can you just explain really simply what that would take for a solo operating studio guy to get that happening on a daily basis? Like, what is the physical process? You got a little tape machine, and you put in a data tape, and you hit record, or how does it work? Is it automated?
It's almost that simple. You have to know your way around dropping a SCSI card in a computer, but beyond that, really, it's just a connection, and you buy the tape, and you get the application, and if you are not terminal line friendly, then you have to pick a different application, but then essentially, it's put the tape in, start the archive, walk away.
Can it be automated totally, so you don't have to do anything on a
retrospective do that?
You can, there's, yeah,
You still have to put the tape in?
I mean,
Well,
you could have a robotic, you could have a 4 or 8 tape, very inexpensive robotic system that will do it automatically for you as well. But I mean, just from the bare bones, cheapest way in the door, you can buy just a single standalone tape drive.
And you have to put the tape in every time, or you just leave it there?
Well, you would, I mean, it depends on if you're using it for incremental backups of a project you're working on, or whether you're doing a archival backup, closing out a project. Then you'd want to create one archival, or a set really, of archival tapes for that project, and then get that the hell out of your studio.
So the $2,000 solution means you have to pull the tape out and stick a new one in.
Some people have one for every day of the week, so that if there's something happens on Friday, you could always go back to Monday. Some people have 2, A, B, you flip them every night. It depends.
Larry?
Yeah, one thing, Ron and George, I'm curious about your comments about on LTO3. I think a lot of people get sort of entranced by the Series A machines, which is like, oh, it's real cool. You don't have to worry about SCSI. You can just plug it into the Ethernet, but you have to use the software, and it has time code, metadata buildings, and all sorts of things. But you can't, if I understand correctly, use VRU or retrospect. You have to. It writes a header at the beginning of the tape. So if they've sold 2 million LTO3 machines, you can only play your tape back with one of the 50,000 Series A machines.
Man, you've got me on this one, because I've only used SCSI.
Yeah, I think it's a very dangerous thing. I think a lot of people think, well, that's really cool, but you can only use the software that's, in a sense, built into the machine.
I've ran into that one time, and what happened
I've
was,
just heard about it.
it was a, somebody bought a deeply discounted, non-brand name device, and see, every LTO3 out there can accept a firmware update that will completely eliminate what you talked about.
But you can only do it on PC.
Right.
You can't do it on Mac.
But the issue is that if you're buying it from, you know, Crazy Joe's LTO shop, and he is, you know, essentially buying the cheapest drives that he can, and then putting them in Crazy Joe's enclosures, you know, Crazy Joe has not got a firmware R&D staff in place, and so that's where you're going to get your butt bit. I mean,
But you know, there's a better solution, because there's a, what's it called, FRX S1 FireWire to SCSI adapter. It's a little Japanese SCSI adapter, and just go with traditional firmware on the LTO3. But I mean, the early adopters go in there and try to make this stuff work, and if it doesn't work, we're going to talk about it. So I guess the question is what's a good forum to talk about it? You tell me.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue too with respect to software, I mean, VRU, when I upgraded to an LTO3 changer, you know, in the director I worked for, he got the exact same thing, so we would have geographic separations. And so we first started with VRU, which I had always heard good things about. The things you mentioned are indeed very good, but it's user hostile.
Well, we want BRU to work, and we're feeding back data.
Well,
yeah, but what is it?
It's less much, but following its stupidity, retrospect is more friendly, don't you think?
yeah, but I don't trust the backups.
And we don't trust the company.
And
it's proprietary.
And they are, to Tullis's own, I'm not pimping them, but I will, I'm sorry. They are, I mean, we told them, it's like, you're never gonna make a command, you know, engineers use a terminal or a command line application. So, I mean, we get beta builds every week or two, and I mean, they are, I would say 95% there in terms of where you've got a real user interface, where it's a drag and drop.
And it's really incremental.
It's really, and as opposed to TAR, if on a restore, if it sees a bad block of data, it'll skip the bad block and keep going, where a TAR restore will choke.
What's that activation?
It's kind of called Tullis Group, T-O-L-I-S. You can just Google Tullis.
The app is called BRU, B-R-U.
And that's what you would recommend?
With reservation, we recommend need to read the recommendations and read the disclaimers.
There was one last question in the front here, and then we have to pack it in.
A comment for him. You don't have to necessarily use retrospect, but PMC Dance has white papers on how to back up. It's, you know, terminology that you might understand for how that would work in an LTO situation.
So in addition to being a recording engineer or producer, taking out the garbage, being the IT guy, marketing, bookkeeping, now you get to learn how to build an archival system. I wanted to thank all you folks for your attention. Just as a last note, we have a couple copies of these recommendations for delivery and digital audio workstation guidelines up here at the table if you'd like to come up and get them. First come, first serve. Thank you very much.